Hey everyone, thanks for joining. We'll get started in a few minutes here. All right, as everyone streams in, we're going to be using StreamYard for this webinar to try to make it as interactive as possible. On the right-hand side, there's a comment section. And so if everyone just wants to comment where they're calling in from, just to test out the commenting, and we'll see where we have everyone from. Awesome. So we got people from Richmond, Toronto, some New York City people close by. We're based in Union Square, right in New York City. California. Glenn is right next to us. Okay. Hi, Glenn. All right. Houston, Texas is in the house. I pronounced Toronto correctly. I doubt that. I have terrible pronunciation, but I will take it. Thank you, Danielle. All right. We'll get going in one more minute. All right, let's kick it off. We did a webinar 2 weeks ago for Claude for HR, and the response was amazing, and the feedback was awesome. And so we wanted to run it back. This time, we're going to be going through a little bit more advanced workflows. The idea here is to show not how you can just prompt Claude or any AI agent, but actually how you can set it up to run automatically. So how can you schedule tasks? How can you create skills for reusable prompts to make your workflows a lot more seamless? For people who are online, you probably saw that Claude or Anthropic just released their latest model, Opus 4.7. Hopefully that does not cause any technical difficulties for us. I know their servers are probably getting overloaded. We're basically going to be doing live demos the whole time, so it's a risky day to do it, but we're going to try to make it happen. All right, so let's jump into it. So my name's Max Shaw. I'm the co-founder and CEO here at Windmill, and I'm joined by Nicole, who heads our growth team.
Hi, everyone. So great to see so many of the same attendees from our previous webinar. I know we got the question a lot of if it will be recorded. This one will be recorded just like the last one, and we've been uploading them all to YouTube, so we'll share the recording after.
Awesome. So some quick background on Windmill before we jump into the demo. Windmill, the first product we launched was AI performance reviews. And with by leveraging AI, we were able to get the average review time. Usually it takes about 4 or 5 hours. We were able to get it down to under 10 minutes. And the reason we're able to do this is not because AI is just drafting the review from its memory. Instead, we've collected all the context necessary so that AI already knows all the different pieces of information. And that first draft that our system's able to generate is pretty close to the final thing that a manager wants to release. This makes cycle times a lot faster. And overall, most importantly, both managers and individuals are much more satisfied with this approach. It takes less time, but it's also more grounded in reality. The reason we're able to do this so effectively is what we call the context graph for your people. This is really the secret sauce of why our product works and works well. And this is why performance reviews work and one-on-ones work and our pulse surveys work well. We've built out this context graph for your people, and there's 4 layers to it. Even if you don't use Windmill, as you start to think about how can I leverage AI in performance, if you want agents to be able to answer questions about performance, this is really tricky stuff to get right, and you need to build this context graph. We think of it as 4 key layers. People, so who they are, how are they connected, job titles, org chart, also the underlying permissions. I know we got a lot of questions about security last time, and we'll dive into it this time as well. Making sure data is permissioned correctly is absolutely critical, especially for sensitive data like we deal with here in HR. The other thing is not just the org chart, but who is actually working together. So this we call organizational network analysis. On top of that, we have our evidence layer, which is all the integrations that Windmill is connected to. This helps you understand what is the ground truth of what actually happened, what deals were closed, what code was pushed, what presentations were created. But that type of activity is kind of nothing without standards. What does good look like? And this varies company to company and department to department. So as you're starting to introduce AI and agents to help with these people decisions or starting to understand your team, it needs to understand the standards. So this includes things like company values, goals, priorities, leveling for different positions. And then the final layer, which is really critical and makes, I would say, HR different than like coding. With coding or engineering, there's usually pretty much a right or a wrong answer. With a lot of the things we deal with, there is not a right or a wrong answer. And so you need to gather the perspectives of multiple people, whether it's continuous feedback or one-on-ones or performance reviews or quick pulse surveys or even managers leaving private notes. This human layer is absolutely critical. If you combine all these pieces together, you're able to use AI effectively to help understand your people. We still don't think you should be using AI to kind of be making really important decisions, but it should be augmenting managers and HR leaders to help make the right decisions. So with that, I want to jump into the content here, which is primarily going to be demos and how you can use Claude effectively.
Amazing. And a little bit of context, after our previous webinar, we did an AI adoption survey just to understand the current state of AI adoption across different companies and HR departments. These are some of the stats that we pulled that we thought might be interesting to share today. There are definitely some differences between individual adoption and organizational readiness. As you can see, based on those who completed the survey, 90% of people are now using AI multiple times a day, and 60% say that it's saving them 1+ hours per day. And 50% think that it's a 5 out of 5 in terms of importance related to their job. 74% of companies are strongly encouraging AI use. And then we added some other stats here on what AI is being used for today. You can see there's some that are specific to the HR functions and some that are a bit more general, with around 86% using it for writing, editing, and brainstorming. Those have been some of the most common use cases. Now, we're going to run this AI adoption survey for another couple of weeks. We'll share it after the webinar. And if you complete the survey, we will package it up and share it in a nice report. So we'd love your participation, and that will come at the end in the post-webinar email. Now, a quick poll question as we get started. We would love to just know from everyone joining us today, what is your current level of AI fluency? 3 different levels here, from novice to master, so we can get a sense of who's in the room with us.
In order to respond to polls, put the number inside the comments on the right-hand side in StreamYard. So it's a 1, 2, or a 3, and we'll start to see those stream in. All right. All right, so we have most people are at the pro level. We have a few masters and then a few novices as well. Well, hopefully this webinar will help everyone level up. And to start, I wanted to provide a bit of background. I actually did this on the last webinar as well, and I think it's really important. There's a lot of confusing terms and topics with AI right now. And so I want to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of what are the tools we're talking about and how do they work at a high level. So the leading kind of model providers, Gemini, which is Google, OpenAI, and Claude, which is Anthropic, they all have different versions of how you can access their AI models. So there's Gemini, there's ChatGPT, Codex, Claude Chat, Claude Code, and Claude Cowork. Now, these different systems have different capabilities. And so if you think about this as a plot from on the left-hand side, we have ability, and on the right-hand side, we have complexity. I would put Gemini, ChatGPT, and Claude Chat all kind of in this bottom right-hand corner. They're definitely very capable. They're very easy to use, but they are kind of the most simple. Then you have Claude Code, which I would put somewhere around here. And then I would put Codex and Claude, sorry, I would put Claude Cowork right here. So these terms are very confusing. And then Claude Code and Codex over here. So Claude Code and Codex are primarily for engineers. And so if you're trying to write code, these are the tools you're probably going to jump on. I think Claude Cowork is kind of the sweet spot for anyone who's at that level 2 or level 3 who's trying to use AI with relatively complex workflows, but is not doing kind of raw engineering. And one of the key differences between these systems is that some of them will run on the internet and some of them run on your computer. So ChatGPT, Gemini, and Claude Chat all run on the web. This means they do not have access to your computer. These three, Claude Cowork, Claude Code, and Codex, all run locally on your computer. So what does this mean in practice? So if I open up Claude and I'm in Claude Chat, they just updated this interface. I don't know if people have seen it. There is now 3 different tabs. It was separate before. There's Chat, Cowork, and Code. And if I go to Chat and I say, what's on my desktop, and ask a question, we can see I'm using Sonnet 4.6, which is the model picker. It's going to say, I don't have access to your computer's desktop. And then a bunch of other kind of weird stuff. That's because Chat is running on the web. If you want the AI to be able to access your computer, that's where Cowork comes in. And you can see I can add a folder from my computer, and now I'll have access to all those files. And I'll show that in a second of how you can leverage that. The other thing that is very confusing about the state of AI is all these different terms. Skills, commands, gems, instructions, custom instructions, slash commands. Then we have things like MCPs and integrations and apps. And these terms have changed a lot over, especially the last 6 months. But you can really think of them as 2 different buckets of capabilities. On the left-hand side, you have what I would call context tools. So when you write a prompt, you are filling in the context. And often you want to reuse prompts or insert snippets is another term. That's where skills come in. There are ways of reusing prompts over and over again so you don't have to type them each time. Skills seems to be becoming the dominant term for all this kind of stuff. Most of these other ones are kind of going away, but this could continue to evolve. But all of these are kind of the same. The other section is what I would call connectors. And this is increasingly the most important part of how people are able to get a lot done with AI more recently. Over the last few years, everyone's been using kind of AI as a chatbot where you can ask questions and get answers. More recently, people are using AI to actually get work done. And one of the primary ways you can do that is by connecting the apps you already use to these AI systems to allow them to both read and write to those applications. And I'm going to show a bunch of examples of this. But connectors and skills are probably the 2 key terms. And these are the 2 terms that Anthropic is using. So here I am in Claude Cowork. And if people have questions, just throw your questions in there. We'll get to them as I go, or we'll get to them at the end. If I go into Cowork and I go to customize, this is where you see the skills and the connectors. On the skills, I have personal skills, shared skills, which I'll talk about in a second. This is new and extremely helpful. And then you have built-in skills. We then have connectors. So these are the apps that you want to connect to the system. So I have Gamma connected. Gamma is a tool that allows me to really easily create presentations. And I'll show you an example of how that works. I have GitHub connected. We have Granola connected. We have Notion connected. We have Slack connected. And then we have Windmill connected. Windmill is obviously the product we build. We have an MCP. So I have that connected here as well. Now, if I go into one of these connectors, one really important thing to understand is these different tools and the different permissions. So I know there's a lot of questions about security. And one of the important things to think about is if you're using an AI agent, what can it do and what can it do with your permission and what can it do without your permission? So by default, when you connect one of these connectors, the read-only tools are usually set to always allow, and the write-delete tools are often set to needs approval or blocked. So if I want to connect Slack, but I don't ever want Slack to be able to send a message on my behalf, I can look at this send message tool and I could either require permission or I could just block it entirely. And if I block it entirely, AI is never going to be able to send a message on my behalf. So it's worthwhile for all the connectors you have, especially if you're worried about what data is it accessing, or more specifically, what could go wrong if the agent did something wrong. You should really try to understand, and you can just look through these tools. So in Notion, it can fetch documents, it can get comments, teams, users, and it can search, and then it can write, it can create databases. If you don't want it to create databases, you can just disable it right here or require permission. So really important to keep that in mind as you go. So let's start with this Slack connector. I didn't show this off last time. I've increasingly found this really helpful. And so I could say something like, send a message to the all Windmill demo channel saying hello from the webinar. We got a question around, are all of these pre-built into Claude, or did you have to design them? These are all pre-built. All these connectors were pre-built into Claude. The Windmill connection, I added as a custom MCP, which you can go plus, add custom connector. The other ones, you just have to authenticate. They're pretty much ready to go. And then skills, there is built-in skills. You can use plugins to install groups of skills. And then you can also create your own skills or share skills, which we'll talk about in a second. So I did this thing. So it's going to say, Claude wants to send a message from Slack, hello from the webinar. And now it sent the message. And if I go to Slack and I go to the All Windmill demo, you can see my agent just sent a message. Now, every time Claude sends a message from Slack, it's going to say sent using Claude. This is baked in, so you know it was an agent that sent it. And I see some people in the chat saying you don't want your agent to send messages from yourself in Slack. And so you could certainly disable that tool if you want. I actually find it pretty effective. And it's sent using the, it has this disclaimer so that other people know that this was generated with Claude. I won't get into it in this webinar, but there is a way to create a custom app and send on behalf of like an agent that's a third party. That's a little bit more of a technical setup, but that also is possible. Okay, so let's jump into our first demo. So in this demo, we have this Notion database set up with a bunch of company policies. And there's two onboarding guides that are really critical, this general onboarding and this engineering onboarding. And let's say I'm an HR and managers are constantly asking me when they have new hires start, what's the onboarding policy or what's the onboarding schedule? And so what I want to do is send every manager who has a new hire, I want to send them a ping in Slack with just the key links that they need. So let's show you how I can set this up. So the first thing I'm going to do is say, who are the new employees starting this week? Use Windmill to find start dates. So now this is going to use the Windmill MCP to find when employees are starting based off their start date. And it should give me a list of employees who are starting this week. Now, this is why increasingly it's really important to choose tools that have open APIs and open MCPs so that you can hook up your own agents to it. Unfortunately, most HRIS systems do not support MCPs at the moment, and often the APIs are closed down. But this is definitely something that you should consider as you're evaluating software. So who are the new employees starting this week? Here are the 4 new employees starting this week. Now, I'm going to just paste in a prompt here. And I'll read it in a second. But basically what I say is I want to craft a Slack message to the managers who have employees starting this week. So if you look here, Mark has 3 employees starting this week, and Georgia has 1 employee starting this week. And what I want you to do is find the onboarding guides in Notion and include the Notion articles in a message to the managers. So the first thing it's doing is it's searching Notion to find these onboarding guides. Now it's asking, so and it's saying, do I want to send as a draft, which would mean I confirm the message, or do I want to send directly? I'm actually just going to choose to send it directly. If this works, what I want it to do is send a message to Mark, send a message to Georgia with these quick links. You'll notice that Lisa is not an engineer. So she's in customer success. So the agent chose not to send the engineering specific link. It's asking me for approval again. This is a bug in Claude Cowork. It should just send, and if we go over here, and if we go to Mark, you'll see it just sent this message. Hey, Mark, just a heads up, you have 3 team members starting this week. Here are some Notion resources to help you get them up to speed. Right? So super simple. You can obviously spend a lot of time crafting how you want this message to look, but it sent that message to Mark, and then it sent this message to Georgia as well. I was testing earlier. You have 1 member started, Lisa, and you'll notice it did not include the engineering link because it didn't find it relevant. Now, this is great to be able to do this on a one-off, but the real power is when I turn this into what is called a scheduled task. And we'll put up a poll here. I'm curious if people have used scheduled tasks before. They're really valuable. So I could say, can you schedule this to run every Monday morning at 10 a.m.? You can create scheduled tasks right from here. I can go new task, but the simplest way is just to have a conversation, have Claude do what you want, and then ask it to create this scheduled task. So here it's creating the scheduled task. Give it a second. It looks like we have a few people have used them before, but the majority have not. And I'll click schedule. And so now I've just created my first scheduled task. Every single Monday morning at 10 a.m., it's going to ping every single manager that has someone starting with the relevant docs that are most helpful. And one of the nice things here, one of the really nice things here is that as I update Notion or whatever you use as like your kind of documentation for company policies, this will automatically update. Historically, in order to do something like this, you'd have to kind of build like a if else like conditional flow, and it was super complicated. Now it's really straightforward, and it will automatically dynamically update based off of what's in Notion. There's a question here around if we don't use Windmill, do you have a recommendation on a system that would connect well to pull start dates from? Unfortunately, I don't. I think HiBob has an MCP that kind of works. Most of the other HRIS systems, I did not find MCPs. I assume they will add them at some point, or else you can use Windmill. We will let you access the data. All right. So that's a quick example of how you can use Cowork to automatically send these messages every Monday morning. Let's do another one. So now let's say onboarding is going, and we think it's going pretty well, but we're not really sure. This is where onboarding surveys are really helpful. You can send them at different cadences, like 7 days after, 30 days after, and collect that feedback in the moment. To actually collect the data, we're going to use Windmill to do that. Windmill has those capabilities. And so what I can do in Windmill is create a new, what we call pulse survey. And I could say this is we'll call it a 60-day onboarding survey. It's going to choose a discussion guide. We can choose who we send it to. I'll trigger this based off start date, so it won't actually send to everyone. Then one of the nice things that we can do here is whether you want to be named or anonymous. We can choose anonymous for now. And for something sensitive like this, having a platform that's purpose-built is probably the way to go rather than trying to have like your Slack agent ping a bunch of people. When we go to launch this pulse, I can then schedule it for later, and I can set it to go 60 days after people start. And what will happen is once you set that up in Windmill, I can show you an example, our agent will reach out to you and conduct this quick onboarding survey right from Slack. So this is not Claude, this is Windmill, but I wanted to highlight it. We have an agent named Windy that goes out, and in this case, asks 4 questions to everyone 30 days after they've started. You can see it's a really quick chat back and forth. We meet people in Slack to try to make it as easy as possible and get candid feedback. Once you have these results coming in, so we go into the 30-day onboarding survey, we can see some examples, right? So we've got some results. I could look at the actual underlying responses, or I could look at the summary right in Windmill. But one of the cool things you can do is take the data out of here and automatically analyze it and send the results to your team. So I'm going to jump back into Claude, and I'm going to say, can you fetch the results of the 30-day onboarding survey from Windmill? Okay. So it's going to look into Windmill. It's going to hopefully, if it works, find all these responses. And this is fake data for what it's worth, but find all these responses and pull it back in. Okay. So here are the results from the 30-day onboarding survey. It found we got 11 responses. Here's a summary, overall sentiment. And then I always find the most helpful is how can we make stuff better, right? So here are the top suggestions. How can I find an org chart or who goes for what? Get tool access sorted before day one. A few people had issues getting tools, right? A bunch of really good stuff in here. So what I can do next, and I'm actually going to use Whisper Flow here. I think voice prompting is a really helpful skill if people haven't done it. Whisper Flow is one tool of many that allows you to do it. And so I can do, okay, great. Can you turn this into a Notion doc? At the top of the Notion doc, can you put a TLDR with the high-level takeaways? And then I'm going to put it under this Notion page that I already have, right? So you can see how Whisper Flow was able to understand. I said TLDR. AI is pretty good at voice to text these days. And I notice if you speak, you give more verbose prompts, which generally leads to better results. So it's something you should definitely try out. So here, if I go to this onboarding feedback, you see this is empty. And let's see if it fills it out. So here's onboard feedback. You could say this is a different workspace, so we're keeping it private. Taking a second. While waiting, a few questions. Is this the kind of workflow you could plug Culture Amp surveys into? Yeah, you can plug anything that has an MCP right into these tools. So if it has an MCP, you should, and it allows you to export survey responses, you should be able to do this. Or you have to download the CSV and upload it, which is much more annoying. And you wouldn't be able to run it on a schedule, which I'll show in a second.
And Max, there's another quick question about why Opus. Do you want to just talk through how you think about which model to use?
Yeah, so Opus is the best model. 4.6 was the best as of an hour ago. Now it's Opus 4.7. Generally with Opus, it's slower and it's more expensive, but it just works better. Specifically, it's able to do tool calling, which is what you're seeing here. This is tool calling. I find that Opus just is a lot more resilient and performs a lot better. That said, it is slower and it is more expensive. And for a lot of these workflows probably would work in Sonnet, but you should certainly try out both. So here is this Notion, and I'm going to take it one step further. Can you turn this into a presentation in Gamma? So Gamma is a presentation tool very similar to Google Slides. And so I created it as a text document, which you can see here, right? So I see the responses, key themes, quick wins, and then all the individual responses. But maybe some people want to read it as a presentation. They prefer reading as a presentation. We can quickly do that as well. So this takes a second, but what Gamma is going to do is take this information and turn it into a presentation. So I can prepare the next prompt here. So what I want to do is to, can you send, I'll use Whisper Flow. Can you send the Notion link and the Gamma link to the onboarding feedback channel. It's a private channel in Slack. Include the TLDR in the Slack message itself, plus links to Notion and Gamma if people want to learn more. And if we go to onboarding feedback, we have it right here. So let this run. Okay, it's asking me for permissions. I have, for what it's worth, I have given Cowork permission to do this, so it should be just doing it automatically, but there is some bugs in Cowork. Okay, so here is the presentation. I'm gonna send this so we can open this up. Maybe. Is this it? Yo, give me a second. All right. And it wants to send this message in Slack. We're almost there. Okay. So now you can see on my behalf, it sent this message: 30-day onboarding survey results April 16th. Code-based documentation is a gap. Tool access is slow. Quick wins, and all this information. Now, again, the cool thing here, can you set this up to run every Friday at 5 p.m.? And now, so now what I've just set up in just a few minutes there is that Windmill will automatically run this survey based off start dates. So someone's in the system, Windmill is automatically going to reach out. Our agent, Windy, is going to go ask them questions in Slack to collect their feedback. Then I have Claude Cowork automatically analyze analyze all those results, all the new ones at 5 p.m. every Friday, and send the results of within a link to Notion and a link to Gamma right to a Slack channel. And so now no one has to be doing anything. And every week you'll just get a message like this. And if you're onboarding lots of people, you can see how helpful this type of workflow is. There's some questions around, so we'll schedule this. Some questions around the Gamma presentation. Let's see if it finished. So this is the presentation it made. Here we can just quickly show it. It's not amazing. Definitely some AI slop. It's not perfectly on brand. So I wouldn't say it's perfect, but you can start to see the capabilities here. And there are ways in Gamma to put your brand guidelines in here. And I could have spent more time prompting it to get it exactly how I wanted to. But you can really see how quickly you're able to do things like this. There was also a question around PowerPoint. And you are able to, I could have had Claude generate a PowerPoint. Claude's actually pretty good at these days. So I could have it generate a PowerPoint. It takes some time. But again, importantly, this is running automatically now every Friday at 5 p.m. And people can have a quick discussion about the latest survey results. Awesome. Any questions there, Nicole, that we should go through before we move on to the next topic?
We did get a question about brand guidelines, and I think we touched on this a little bit on the last webinar, but maybe you want to speak to that.
Yeah, so there's kind of two different ways you can do it. One is in the actual prompting myself, like if you have specific terms or stuff you like to use, I could have done definitely a better job like prompting it to what I want. You could also use the skill there and say like inject my brand guideline skill. The other option is in Gamma. There are templates you can use. If you did have a PowerPoint template and you told Claude to use the PowerPoint template as a reference that is in a folder, that would also work really well. So really different ways to do that. There's a few questions around skills versus scheduled tasks. So scheduled tasks, the key thing here is that it runs on a schedule. Skills do not run automatically. They under the hood, like this instructions is basically the same thing as a skill. But if you want to invoke it manually, so the way you invoke skills is by going here, /, here's all the skills. I don't think you'll see your scheduled tasks here. So if you want to manually invoke it, and the nice thing about a scale is you can also add like additional context, right? I can keep typing. That works well. But if you want to put stuff on a schedule and have it run automatically, that's where you're going to want to use a scheduled task. Okay. All right. The final flow I wanted to go through is around AI calibrations. So before jumping into it, I want to show kind of what our product looks like to give you an idea of what we're going to try to build. So this is our calibration tool in Windmill. We have your standard grid and table. The exciting thing we have is this pre-read. The point of the pre-read is to help anchor the calibration meeting around the important topics that are worthwhile to discuss. You're generally not going to discuss every single rating across every single person. There's usually a few different places that you want to spend your time. And so ahead of the calibration, Windmill automatically generates this, sends it out 24 hours in advance so people can review, and then they come to the calibration much more prepped. In the post-calibration, you can then see kind of how scores have changed over time, and you can also read the pre-read that kind of went into that. So we do this automatically in Windmill, but I'm going to show you a little behind the scenes of how you could do something similar manually in Claude Cowork. So let's create a new task again. This time I'm going to use a local file, or a local folder, I mean. So we're going to use this calibration data. And the first question I like to ask when you're working with any kind of like data analysis is to get a sense of the shape of the data. So if I go into this folder, here is the calibration data that we're using. And you can see the employee, the job title, manager, key accomplishments. I know this is small for everyone, but this is the data I fed in. It's 100 rows, and we'll let Claude do a quick analysis. So here's an overview of the calibration data. There's 100 employees across 12 columns, falling into 3 categories. So we have the employee information, we have the manager information, the performance data. So there was 3 questions that were text questions, and then there were 2 ratings questions. And then there's some information. So the first thing I'm going to ask is which of the reviews look super light on details. So as a first pass, I want to kind of get a quick glance. Are any of the reviews, do they seem like they don't really have much concrete details or areas for improvement or anything like that? Now, I could go through all 100 reviews one by one, but I'm just going to ask Claude to do that for me. And you can see, and again, this is, of course, made up data, but we see some specific areas where there's just really not much there. So one of the improvement areas would just keep improving or keep growing, 0 actionable content. Looks like a lot of common copy and paste phrases, right? Where some managers use the same things. And then we actually see 2 managers, specifically Sarah Chen and David Kim are in the doghouse. Hopefully no one has those names on this call, but they did not do a great job filling out the reviews. So as a first pass, you could kind of work with those managers to flesh them out and provide more detail about the content. Now, another thing to look at is biases amongst managers. So you want to understand, are certain managers harder graders than others? Is everyone using the scale appropriately? And of course, this is one of the primary purposes of the calibration, but it makes sense to kind of try to do a lot of this work ahead of the time so you can make that meeting as productive as possible. And so I'm asking Claude if there's biases in the managers. Are some managers harder graders than others? What do you see? And what it's actually doing here is writing code. So this is what a data analyst would do. This is Python. You don't need to know what it is. That's the power of AI, but you can see it's writing code. It's doing a bunch of analysis, and then it's going to give me the results. And it's found some pretty stark patterns. Marcus has rated his engineers an average of 1.91. Now, that might be real, or it could be Marcus's internal representation of a 1 through 5 is different than someone else, right? We see Sarah Chen. And one interesting thing is Jennifer Park basically gave everyone a 3. So you can see how it's able to quickly identify these types of situations. Now, another really good thing to look at for calibration is Do you see any examples where the ratings don't match the content of the reviews? So is there a misalignment between the numerical ratings and the actual content of the reviews? So we're going to run that right now. Let's see. Okay, found a bunch of mismatches. And the final thing I want to do is, let's say I'm meeting with the CEO and I want to create an agenda. I want to focus on the key discrepancies, keep it short and tight. Once this is done, we're going to send that. So now I've essentially analyzed the data in 3 key ways. Analyze the data in 3 key ways, and then turn that into an agenda so that you can spend this time going through the calibration in the most effective way possible. One thing you'll notice here, and I think there's a question about PowerPoint earlier, is Claude decided to make this a document. Personally, I'd rather it be Notion because that's what we use. But this is an example where it can also generate documents. So it's actually going to generate a document here for us. One thing that you can do is if you go to customize, oh, did they just move this around? If I go to Cowork, I have these global instructions here. So I could put something like never use Word documents, Notion for the win, right? And then it will never use Word documents in the future. So that's something you can do if you're constantly running into the same issues frequently, putting it in your global instructions. Okay, so I can rename this. So this was the AI calibration. And so now we have, it's creating this agenda. Let's see, it's taking its time. So now once this agenda gets created, going through this whole flow, obviously it was much faster than without using AI, but it was a little tedious, right? It took some time. I had to copy and paste some prompts that I had saved. This is a perfect opportunity to turn this into a skill. And so what I can do is say, can you turn this into a skill? This will tell Claude to turn this entire conversation into a skill that I can then reuse. I do not recommend creating skills from scratch. So you can go in here and create skill from scratch and write it all. You're going to get better results if you have the conversation and then you tell Claude to turn it into a skill. So that's what we've done there. It's taking a little bit of time. So it's asked me a few questions, which is great. I want to do the full analysis and then create the agenda. Should the skill assume the data is always in CSV? Okay, great. And so now it's working. You can see progress over here. So this is what it's going to do. It's actually creating some evals, which is probably not necessary, but should work fine. So it's going to create the skill. I will let that run. And if I go over to skills, one of the things they released recently is the concept of sharing skills, which is super helpful. So let me actually unshare this to show you what it looks like. So once that gets created, it's going to show up in my personal skills. For some skills, you want to distribute them either to other people or across the company. The simplest way to do that right now is by just clicking on your personal skill, clicking share, and then you can invite people via email. So I could add Ben if I wanted to, or I could have all of Windmill have this skill. So if I want this skill to be available to everyone at Windmill, that's all I need to do. And now anyone who's part of our Claude subscription can access this skill. Now, it's important that these skills don't include sensitive information. They should look up information on the fly. I know there's a previous question about security. It's really critical that the skill itself is just fetching data on the fly, and the data you fetch is permissioned by what you have access to. So I have Notion hooked up here. I can't access other people's private docs in Notion. I can only access what I have. So let's see if this runs. Did we get it yet? We'll give it a second there. The other way to distribute skills is plugins, and you can create organizational plugins. I will say you're probably going to want IT's help here. You need to create a GitHub repository, and there's a little bit of code involved. It can be a helpful thing, especially if you're a bigger organization. But the simplest way right now to share skills, especially with a few people on the team, is just by sharing the skills directly. So I'm going to let this run. We'll see if it finishes. And let's go through a few questions. All right. So here we have a question. Wondering if our team can work collaboratively on the onboarding skill. Yeah, so the way I set up there's no way to share scheduled tasks right now. These are running locally on my computer. And so collaborating on these are a little bit difficult at the moment. I'm sure this will get better. If it is a skill, then you can kind of collaborate on it because other people can edit it. But it's pretty clunky to do it here. I would probably do the collaboration ahead of time, where my recommendation where you do like a little hackathon where each person creates their own skill and then everyone demos and then you kind of combine them all together into like, hey, here's what we think makes the most sense. And then you publish that and you have one person be the owner of that skill. It's definitely an area where it's not that good right now. You can go back and forth on like a Google Doc and then copy and paste into Claude. But that's certainly the area that is a little clunky right now. I don't have an amazing answer there. All right. Another question. So can Sarah Chen or other managers access calibration data if they prompt for it? The answer to that is no. It's really important to understand where data is flowing and where people can see stuff and where they can't. So let me just walk you through kind of what I did here. So the first thing I had is I downloaded this data from an online tool, right? So imagine you take your performance review tool, you download all the data. The only reason that you were able to download all that data is because you have access in that performance review tool. Now this file is local on my computer. I then ran a chat with Claude about the data. Chats are private. There are some places where you can make chats public. You actually can't do that in Cowork. On the web, I think I could. There is a way to share the chat, right? And if I share it, then yes, people will be able to see it. In Claude Cowork, I don't even think there is a way to share it. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. You can't even share it. So all of this is local. Sarah cannot see anything that's going on here. And it's all private to me. So you got to be careful. But in this case, I've done nothing from a security perspective that would concern me. Obviously, we're using Claude. So we are sending this calibration data to Claude. We have 0-day retention turned on so that Claude is not keeping any logs or anything like that. And you have to be comfortable with Claude's or Anthropic's security model. And you can certainly should do things like SOC 2 compliance and all of that. But that's from a internal perspective. I feel very confident from a security perspective that no one's going to see this conversation that shouldn't. Now, once you start sending messages in Slack, and especially if you do it without approval, then something could go wrong. So there is risk there that you want to be careful about. The second you allow agents to send stuff elsewhere, and that's why by default you have to approve those actions, that's where there is some risk. All right, we have another question. Our company is not granted a Claude license to everyone. If I want to create a calibration tool similar to this for HR VPs and managers, could I use Claude to create a ChatGPT agent? I don't think you'd want to use Claude to create a ChatGPT agent, but you certainly could create a ChatGPT agent that does similar stuff. ChatGPT obviously works differently than Claude Cowork. It's in the web, but there are a lot of overlapping capabilities. And for most of these things, you don't need like the latest and greatest model. You're not doing like scientific biology discovery or really hard engineering problems. A lot of these things, especially if you're just kind of like summarizing information, analyzing data, a lot of the models will work pretty well. ChatGPT 5.4 works perfectly fine for this kind of stuff. So if you want to use ChatGPT, you can certainly do that. Of course, I will plug Windmill. We do all this for you, so you don't even have to think about it. right. What else? What other questions do we have, Nicole? We have a question, can anyone edit the skill? It's a good question. Let's see. I might be wrong on it. They changed this recently. This is all new. So let's try to figure out on the fly. Skill, shared skill. So I can edit this one. Share. I'm actually not sure. It's a good question. I don't know if people know the answer to that. If I share this, can other people edit it? Is the question. I think probably not is my guess, actually, now that I think about it. But I'm sure that will change over time. I'm sure Anthropic will allow multiple people to collaborate on skills much better over time.
There's also this question about almost nested skills. Can you have a skill for launching performance reviews and another for calibration and call one skill inside another?
You definitely can. This is a pretty common flow where the actual skill is just text, right? So a skill is nothing more than like if I copy and paste some text into this prompt, that's all a skill is doing, right? And so if I go to the skills, customize skills, and I can actually just look at the text. If I just copy and paste, this is a random skill from actually the previous webinar. If I just copy and paste this in here, this is the exact same thing as what a skill is doing. A skill just makes it so instead of copying and pasting, I can just do this, right? And you can have skills reference other skills. And so there's definitely some best practices around keeping your skills more granular and reusable. So you could have a skill for brand guidelines, for example, and then that other skill I created could reference the brand guideline skill, which is a helpful thing. The other thing that I found helpful is like you put stuff in Notion or a shared doc, you can kind of use that as a pseudo skill because that will stay up to date, and every time the agent fetches it, it will pull in the latest information.
And then there's one question here about dashboards. I know that we built one last time.
People like the dashboard demo. Yeah, we can, let's see. I'll show you. So building dashboards is really good in Claude. The reason I didn't do it this time is it's slow. But we can fire it up right now. Then I can show the one from last time. So I would do a prompt like, can you build me an interactive dashboard that helps me understand this data at scale? I want to be able to filter by manager and also choose between the different questions and also drill into the individual responses. So I want some high-level stats at the top level, but then I can drill in and really understand this, build this as a little web app on my computer that I can play around with. So I would do a prompt like that. And that should work pretty well. There's also this artifact skill that can be helpful. Do I have it? Yeah, this web artifacts builder. This is a really good skill this is from Anthropic that allows you to build these artifacts. I can show you the one that I created last time because people like that. Is this it? Yeah, here it is. So this was for an onboarding pulse. Can everyone see that? And so this is slightly different than this time, but I took all the onboarding responses, broke it out by department, and actually scored it across these different ways. And it built this entire dashboard that I can drill into. And this was just one prompt. So it's really powerful if you prompt it correctly. It's really good at data analysis. Now, the issue with a lot of this data analysis is it's hard to share this stuff after the fact and it doesn't stay up to date, which is a downside. But if you're trying to do data analysis, using the web artifact builder is a really good approach to get some really good results.
And one last question there. How can people share these dashboards that they've built? What are the different options available?
Yeah, that's where it's still not great. There is a few options. So one is you can literally send HTML files around. People do it if you have a technical enough company, you just send the HTML file and other people can open it. You can host it somewhere. So we push stuff to Vercel and host the web apps. You also could do it where you actually like fully deploy them and they're live updating with data. For most of that stuff, you're probably going to want to involve IT or involve someone a little bit more technical. I think in the web chat for Claude, you can share artifacts, which kind of works. But I would say this is definitely one of the harder things right now and one of the main downsides of using Claude for this data analysis. You get it working great locally, but then sharing it is pretty cumbersome. You can also have it just generate a PDF and send that PDF out. Awesome. All right. Well, hopefully those demos were helpful, showed a bunch of different workflows. I'm going to go through a few more slides, and then we can do Q&A for any questions that people still have. All right. So one of the things I wanted to reiterate is that it's really important increasingly important to pick the right tools, right? And I think about this AI native stack of what you're looking for as you're trying to build out these different tools and how they all work together. A few key recommendations here. And some of these are new with AI, some of these have been around forever. First is to design with the end user in mind, not just the HR admin. I think a lot of HR tools in the past have been built for HR workflows, and then they're pretty cumbersome for individuals or managers to use. The second one is really critical, is around demanding openness. You need APIs, you need webhooks, you need data portability, you need MCP support. I know different providers have different levels of openness. Some of them are pretty closed, some of them are pretty open. I would increasingly, at least me personally, I would not be buying any software products right now that do not have an MCP that I can integrate with. Now, maybe I'm ahead of the curve because I'm doing so much in Claude locally that I really care about that, but I would highly recommend at least that it's on the roadmap and something that's coming pretty soon. You're only able to kind of chain these apps together in the ways I did because of the MCP support. So for example, for that first flow, I was grabbing the start dates from Windmill and I was sending to Slack. That second flow, I was grabbing the pulse responses from Windmill, then using Notion to create a doc, and then using Gamma to create a presentation, and then sending to Slack. So the more openness the tools, I think those are going to be the winning solutions. Security is really important. And this is something that we stressed last time. I want to stress even more here now. When you're evaluating tools, you really need to understand what is the security profile. I don't have the belief that you should not use AI because of quote unquote security. But I'm a strong believer that you should be really confident in the tools you're using and care about things like, do they have 0-day retention? So are they keeping your logs around? Is your data going to be used for inference or training? And often there's a way to opt out. And how can AI what's like the worst case scenario of what could happen? There are ways to do this in a safe and effective way. And I do not think you should use security as a reason to not adopt AI, but you got to be careful. And you want to centralize a lot of these decisions. And one of the reasons people like Windmill is because it's one centralized place that you can make a lot of these workflows consistent and security friendly. But it's definitely something to keep in mind. And then the final piece, which I think hopefully the demo is outlined, is it's a lot easier to chain tools together. And I think historically, rightfully so, people got too many like SaaS vendors and there's just too many things and you have all these different logins and it's hard to see how they all work together. I think increasingly with AI, it's a lot more reasonable to work across multiple tools pretty quickly. If they're all open, then it's a lot less important, in my opinion, to have one centralized tool that does literally everything. And instead, you should figure out what is the best in breed solution for each individual problem I'm having. Now, you can go too much on the other extreme where you have just way too many tools, but it's a lot easier to chain these things together. And so if I want to pull stuff from one system and push it elsewhere, MCPs are really good at that. So with that, I'll turn it over to Nicole for next steps, and then I will stay on as long as people have questions.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. I know we're at 3 o'clock, but as Mac mentioned, we're going to stick around for a little bit and answer questions, just so everyone can understand what's going to happen after this webinar. I saw a lot of questions about recordings. We are going to send a follow-up email with some information, including a recording to this webinar, a link to the AI adoption survey that we mentioned at the beginning of the call, as well as notes that we've taken with Granola, which is a note-taking and summary tool, just so you can have those for easy access as well. There'll also be a link to book a demo for Windmill if you're interested in learning more about our performance review product. There is a pinned comment here as well where you can just easily book a demo. And we encourage everyone who found this webinar super helpful to post about it. We saw some incredible posts with people sharing their learnings after. We love seeing those. So if you post, tag Max, myself, or Windmill, and we'll make sure to engage with it and repost.
All right, let's do a few questions. So Amanda asked, there are a lot of skills available online. How do you review them for security? I think downloading skills from online is one of the biggest security risks to AI. This is actually where a lot of the problem is happening. And you need to be really careful about downloading random skills or running random prompts you find on the internet. Now, in terms of how do you review it for security, it's just a text file, so you can look at it and review it, but be very careful. And for anyone who knows what OpenClaw and Claude bots are, a lot of this, most of the security issues there were because it freely installs, downloads, and then runs skills without anyone really understanding what's happening, which can cause a lot of issues. So I'd be very careful about this. The way to review skills is to just look at the text and read through it, but definitely be careful. All right. We have a Windmill question. What is Windmill exactly, and where does it typically fit into the HR tech stack? So we're building this context graph for your people. Right now, the primary use case is around performance management. And so we're generally fitting into the HR tech stack for that performance management module. So performance reviews, one-on-ones, and pulse surveys, continuous feedback, that kind of stuff. If you're interested in learning more, definitely check out a demo. All right. We had a question, would it work if you created a database in Notion? So yeah, in Notion, for the Notion experts, I was creating pages. It also can create databases, and you could put a new row in the database, and you could have structured columns. You have tons of flexibility here, and you can really use it for anything. All right, can you share more about the security of employee data in Windmill when using it as a connector MCP for Claude? So the way the Windmill MCP works and the way that most MCPs work is that when I authenticate with whether it's Windmill or Notion or Slack, the agent like Claude Code on my computer or Cowork on my computer has the exact same permissions as I would have if I logged into the website. So in terms of security, my Cowork cannot do anything that I otherwise couldn't do by just logging into Windmill or logging into Slack, right? So if you connect Slack, it's not like your agent now can see private channels that you're not in. It inherits, and not all MCPs work like this, but most MCPs work this way, and this is how Windmill works. We inherit all the exact same permissions. So there's not really, there's certainly things to worry about for security, but this is not an area that I would necessarily be concerned about. The risk is not that someone's able to access data in Windmill that they shouldn't. The risk is that they set up a workflow that downloads the data and then sends it out to the whole company, right? And maybe they're an HR admin, right? So they do something where in Windmill, they can see everything, they could download the data, and they could send it out to the whole company. Now, that's already a risk, right? An HR admin could do that right now. They could download everyone's performance reviews and send them out to the whole company. You obviously trust them not to do that. The risk is that an agent does it or Cowork does it without you knowing by accident. So the best way to prevent that is in Cowork, preventing tools like sending Slack messages from running by default. So I had in the demo, I had allow all by default. In practice, you might want to turn that off, especially if you're dealing with sensitive information. All right. There's a question around when enabling an HR team to harness AI, would you recommend that senior leaders build the skills first and then train their teams, or empower the HR team to develop these skills themselves from start? I found when I talked to a lot of executives around how can we drive AI adoption, how can you measure it and drive it? My general answer is you got to do all the above. I find that learning to use these tools, I think one misconception is that AI makes everything easy. And so because it's AI, it's easy and I'll just figure it out. I do not think that that's the case. I have to spend a lot of time, even just to keep up on all the latest stuff that's coming out and how everything's evolving on literally a daily basis. And these tools are not easy to use. I do find though, there's an initial learning curve And once you get past that, you learn how to use AI to help you use AI. It's a little reflexive, but I can start to talk to Claude to ask like best practices and stuff like that. And so once you get people over the hump, then they kind of adopt it on their own. But getting them over the hump is not easy. And so you need to do everything in your power to help people and teach people. And I think a combination of things like hackathons, of sharing skills, I think all of managers and all of executives need to be using it themselves. That's probably the number one place I would start. You're not going to be able to effectively empower a team if you're not pretty native yourself. And once people see you using it, adoption is going to become a lot easier. So definitely start there. Everyone in HR, though, also needs to develop these skills. You really want every single person at the company to develop these skills. There are also ways to track adoption. Actually, in Windmill, you can connect Claude and Anthropic and Gemini and Cursor to help see who's using AI and how much. There's other tools to do that. I can go into Claude myself and look at analytics. You're going to want to look at adoption. And not all adoption's good, but the first place you want to start is let's get people using AI, right? Let's get people using these tools frequently to improve their workflows. The next level up from that is like using the tools effectively. You'll certainly have scenarios. You saw how easy it was for me to create a presentation and send it out. And you can imagine if you multiply that the entire company and everyone's just sending out super long documents and super long presentations, is that really that helpful? Probably not. And so the term like AI slop comes into play where you got to be careful about that. But I would start, step one is get people to use it. And then step two is teaching them how to use it effectively. All right. Any other questions? People want more trainings. There's tons of content online. YouTube's a great place. I learned a lot of these different things. Anthropic has a bunch of beginner courses. And then asking the chatbots themselves. So ask Claude, hey, how can I use skills? What's the best place to use them effectively? Usually their answers are correct. Not 100% of the time, but usually they give pretty good answers and best practices. Another thing you can do, which is kind of fun, is if you've been using ChatGPT or Claude for the whole week, or like for a whole month, you can ask Claude to review all of its memory and give you tips about how it can use AI better. So that's kind of a nice trick to try to figure some stuff out as well. All right. Any other questions? Nicole, that you see? Yeah, I would second this, Diana. This is 100% true.
So a question around some of the original prompts that you used. We're happy to share those in a follow-up email as well if people are curious, some of the prompts Max used earlier in the webinar.
Anything else? All right, I think I've answered all the questions. So we're going to cut it off here. We're about 10 minutes over. Thank you everyone for attending. Hopefully it was helpful. Please give us feedback. If you found anything particularly interested, post on LinkedIn and tag us. Love to hear feedback. Anything you liked, anything you didn't like. Everyone said I went too fast last time. Did I go slower? Probably not. And of course, if you're interested in Windmill, check us out and we're happy to give you a full demo of what we're doing.
Thank you, everyone.